friends, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark.
And I'm Midge Munster. And Penny, you and I have talked a fair bit on this show about phenomenon that could be attributed to extraterrestrial visitors of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
From things like Stonehenge to like just cryptid sightings like the Fresno Nightcrawler or Flatwoods Monster. And these are all possibilities of things that have happened when aliens have like come to Earth. But what about when humans are taken to aliens?
Oh,
Oh. So today I want to talk about the history of alien abductions.
interesting.
So, as I just mentioned, there are many instances throughout ancient history that have been unexplained and were since attributed to possible extraterrestrial activity. But the first recorded actual alien abduction case that got any kind of publicity, I suppose, um, which is considered like the modern era of alien activity, occurred in 1957. So before this, there were stories of abductions, and they were referred to as paleo abductions, but they weren't this specific concept of like a spacecraft coming down and taking a human
Mm-hmm.
to extra extra. How many times is Midge gonna ruin the word extra?
It's a
Take
tough one.
take a shot every time Midge trips up on that word. Anyway, the date is October 16th, 1957, and a 23-year-old Brazilian farmer named Antonio Villas Boas claimed that he was working in his field at night to avoid heat. So he was working at a time he wasn't normally working when he saw a large red star
Mm-hmm.
coming at him from the sky. And as it got closer, he could see that it was an egg shaped aerial craft, which he said landed in front of him and extended three, like, tripod legs down on the ground. And at the sight of that, of course, he attempted to flee the scene pretty, pretty
Yeah,
immediately.
wisely.
Right. So he hopped on a tractor, but he said that the lights and battery died almost instantly. And so he was unable to get anywhere. And as he was trying to flee on foot, he was surrounded by humanoid gray figures that were in jumpsuits and helmets, and they dragged him on board the aircraft, where he was then covered in a slimy gel, and they took various tests on him, including vials of his blood. Um, and would you believe it, just now is where it gets crazy. I know. So he also described that a female humanoid came into his like holding chamber, and he claims that she was extremely attractive to him.
Oh.
But she was like an alien, like she was humanoid but not human. Um, but he said she had like long white hair and was completely nude, and he believed that the events that happened next were for the purpose of helping the alien race breed further. And once his kind of use to them was over, they released him back to his farm, where he returned home and found that over 4 hours had passed. And he said while he was on the ship that he felt that maybe like half an hour to an hour had
Mhm.
passed. Um, he he said he got a tour of the ship too, and that he had tried to take like a clock type object to corroborate his story, but that he was caught by his captors trying to take
Mhm.
it, and they didn't let him take it. Um, he did later replicate some symbols and things that he claimed to have seen on the walls of the ship for some investigators. Uh, but there was, of course, no real proof that anything
Mhm.
had occurred. However, this is the first real abduction story of its kind that got media attention. However, as as is unfortunately the case in a lot of things, it didn't really get attention until a few years later when something similar happened in the United States. Um, so the case that really put abduction on the map happened in, well, the story comes from Portsmouth, New Hampshire
Mhm.
in 1961. It happened somewhere in between Vermont and New Hampshire. We're not sure
Yeah.
exactly where. But this is the story of Betty and Barney Hill. And they were a married couple who were driving home from a kind of delayed honeymoon trip to Niagara Falls. And they,
Classic.
classic. And they decided to do the drive all in one night, which brave to
Yeah.
begin with. uh, big choice. But they had stopped at a diner in Vermont to kind of fuel up, get a cup of coffee and everything before they pushed through the rest of the drive. And they left that diner at around 10 p.m. And as they drove their way back home, they noticed a light in the sky that I believe Betty noticed first and was kind of like, hey, that seems like it's following us. um, and at first, Barney kind of waved her off and was like, oh, it's probably just, you know, there's a reasonable explanation. It's just
Yeah.
no big deal. Uh, but it seemed that it was like zigging and zagging with the car, changing position back and forth in the sky. And they were saying, we had the reference points of certain trees or the moon or what have you, that we could see these unmoving objects. And it was moving from side to side with the car.
Mhm.
Uh, so this continued for around 70 miles, which,
Ooh.
yeah, at that point, I'm going to start getting a little suspicious.
Yeah, it's pretty sus.
Yeah, how long before you were like, maybe it's aliens, Penny?
Yeah, I mean, 70 miles is a good long way.
I do feel like even at 70 miles, you personally would still be like, crazy plane out here tonight.
Probably. I'd be like, "Why is the CIA after me?"
Well, I'd be willing to bet that both of us are on a watch list somewhere from all the things we Google for this
I
podcast.
know, right?
Uh, but yeah, around that 70-mile mark, they were like, we should try to see what's going on here, or if it, is it just our
Yeah,
imaginations?
what's up? Yeah.
So they stop the car, they pull off the side of the road. They have binoculars with them from their trip, and they could see at that point that the object was spinning in the
Mm.
air. Barney, it's really funny. Like later, the books and interviews and stuff, they make a big point of like saying Barney had a 140 IQ. They're like, Barney was not an idiot. Uh, but he was
Famously, smart people can never be fooled by anything.
never. But he was a really like intelligent
Yeah.
man. And so he did what most of us would probably try to do, to reason away the experience, saying it was a satellite or a military plane. Um, but then it starts getting closer to them, and they also realize that the object isn't making any sound. So, like, obviously, if there's a military plane or jet
Yeah.
going through the sky, you're going to hear something. They realize it's completely quiet. And at the point that the object is about 100 feet above them, this is what they described to have seen through their binoculars. They said it was wide, almost flat, disc like object that had red lights on either side and a row of windows through which they could see gray, human like crew
Mhm.
standing and looking back at them. Barney claimed that he had a handgun in the car and went and grabbed it, and that a voice he could hear in his mind told him to put the gun down.
Spooky.
Mhm. Uh, and it got closer to them, and then the couple claims that they lost consciousness and woke up 2 hours later, 35 miles down the road.
Mm.
That's all we've got at this point. S at that point, they ended up just going home, and they got home around 5 a.m., which, with the distance from where they were at in Vermont and the speed that they were traveling, they had planned that they would get home around 2 a.m., no later than 3 a.m.
Mhm.
And neither of them could account for this lost like 2.5 hours and why they got home so late. Uh, so several months after this, Betty is having consistent nightmares. Barney is developing some strange health problems, and they both are still thinking about this odd experience, so they decide to seek help. And famously, the treatment for people who are like, I can't remember if something weird happened to me, they undergo hypnosis.
Ooh.
And through psychiatric treatment and hypnosis, they uncover what they believe to be the memories of their alien abduction. So they describe a really similar setup to the Boas case, uh, specifically where these like medical examinations are concerned. This is
Yeah.
a thing that has not been present in previous alien encounter stories. Up to this point, there were a lot of alien stories or like visitor stories in the like south of America. But they were all like really friendly to
Yeah.
that point. Like it was like, yeah, some guys showed up on my farm and were really curious about some stuff. And we talked for a while and they gave me a nice little warning about something. And then they like tootled off into space.
Very helpful.
Um, yeah, it was never like, oh, they were trying to take me. And so this idea and then the layer of medical examinations is where the Hills story really takes prevalence. They said that a pregnancy test was done on Betty, but like not as we know it. It was
Yeah.
like a rod stuck into her belly button, is what she claimed, that
Ooh.
went kind of inside of her stomach lining and
Yeah.
was really painful. They also have several highly detailed memories that come through that just kind of like gave me a giggle. um, One was that the aliens were fascinated by the ability to take out Barney's teeth,
Ooh.
and Betty was like, "Yeah, I explained dentures to the aliens, and I told them that that was part of humans aging, and they didn't understand the concept of aging." So lots of just interesting, weird little details. Also, Betty had quite a bit of recall of like chatting with them,
Mm.
where Barney did not. They did not like interact with Barney in that way. So, uh, they recall all this, it's documented, and their story is picked up by a Boston newspaper and quickly, of course, becomes a media
Yeah.
phenomenon because people are like, "You what?"
What? You what now?
Right. And this story is really credited as the catalyst for the alien abduction story as we know it today.
Mhm.
Like I said, the case that happened in Brazil didn't get a lot of publicity at the time that it happened, but once Barney and Betty are abducted, then that story is kind of used to be
Yeah,
like,
kind of like
yeah,
retroactively
right.
confirmation, yeah.
Like, listen, he has a really similar story. Um, but Betty and Barney's story ends up becoming the inspiration for the 1975 film The UFO Incident,
Ooh.
which stars James Earl Jones as
Oh.
Barney. Yes. And Estelle Parsons as Betty. So, kind of a A-list cast there.
Were they
Uh,
actually, is
they
that
were
true to life casting?
They were an interracial couple in
Awesome.
1961,
Hell
yes.
yeah. Good for them.
Which will also kind of come into play here
Hmm.
momentarily because there was a lot of speculation about why they both had this belief, and some people have attributed it to the nature of their relationship. So we'll talk about that.
Sounds good.
But but
Yeah.
yes,
Don't want to get
James
ahead
Earl,
of my
James
things.
Earl Jones. What the heck? That's pretty cool. I've not ever seen that movie, and I didn't even know it existed. So when I was
No,
doing
yeah, I have not heard
the
of that.
research for this, I was like, man, I kind of want to watch that now. But yeah, so how is it possible that two highly intelligent, as we've established so many times, but like two psychologically stable
Yeah,
individuals,
normal people.
quote normal people, would report the same incident if it weren't true? There are ways. Uh, one factor here is movies and
Yeah.
media,
Yeah.
obviously. Um, while today we're obviously talking about alien abductions, this is far from the first observation of extraterrestrials that had been widely documented. Prior to this, there had been a really large uptick in UFO sightings in the late 40s. And of course, the Roswell incident has already happened at
Yes.
this point, which led to the development of Project Blue Book in 1952, which is the United States Air Force's project for investigating UAPs, or unidentified anomalous phenomenon. So, of course, where there's this kind of growth in attention on a subject, media is quick to follow.
Mhm.
So by the time the Hills have their alleged abduction, we have already had several notable examples of Hollywood's like entries into the alien canon. um, we've got Day the Earth Stood Still in 1951. Invasion of the Body Snatchers has happened, 1956. And of course, adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds happened in 1953. We've also got like TV happening. Outer Limits is out there. Uh, and just like sci-fi is already an established genre, even like in literary form. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that films or other media like this would influence people's
Mhm.
imagination and therefore possibly their quote memories.
Yes.
But there are also, of course, psychological explanations. A lot of experts believe that this could be a form of sleep paralysis.
Mhm.
Now, with the Hills, I'm less inclined to believe this
Yeah.
because they experienced it in tandem in a moving vehicle. um,
You know when you're sleeping in a moving vehicle.
I mean, maybe they were driving all night. Um, but sleep paralysis and the what am I trying to say? Like the recipe to create it,
Yeah.
those similar qualities are present in things outside of sleep paralysis as well, just like extreme stress and
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
anxiety and exhaustion, which is where we'll kind of circle back to Betty and Barney. As we have pointed out, they were an interracial couple in 1961. That was not a time where it was chill to be an
No.
interracial couple. And so there are some speculations around their study that this was already a couple who was under extreme scrutiny and stress. Um, just being like like their persons being picked apart a lot.
Yeah.
They both also had really extreme jobs. Like Barney was commuting, I can't remember how many hours it said, but he had like a crazy commute back and forth to Boston for his job every day from New Hampshire.
No, yeah.
And Betty had like a really intense intake job where she was dealing with a lot of people with like PTSD and things.
Mhm.
So they were in a pressure cooker
Yeah.
as people. So is it possible that that influenced them in a negative way? Definitely.
Yeah.
For
Probably.
sure. For sure. Um, but there are a myriad of different kind of ways that psychologists explain what is sometimes quite literally referred to as UFO syndrome. Now, Penny, I know we've touched on this here before, but where would you say you fall on like alien belief spectrum?
Yeah, I would say that I'm in the side where I do think that there are other forms of life that exist, but I don't think that there's been any real evidence that they have come here and like scanned people or stuck
Yeah,
rods in their belly buttons
right.
specifically.
And I think it probably comes as no surprise to our listeners that I am a person who definitely believes there is something out there. Now, whether or not that's like traditional gray man, big eyes, pointy
Yeah,
chin
who knows?
aliens, I couldn't say, but I did, while researching for this episode, read a quote on an article on history.com that I had to bring because I think it gave me a giggle, and I know
I
it's
look
gonna
forward
give you a
to
giggle.
this.
Because anyway, I'm just gonna read it. So according to Harvard psychologist Richard J. McNally, those who report abduction might see the world a little differently. According to research, one of the strongest predictors of false recall is a vivid imagination. This group scores high in, quote, magical ideation and is therefore more likely to believe in things like ghosts and tarot readings. I said, just at me next time,
Right,
Richard.
it's like, "Oh, hello."
Because, like, while I was doing this research, I was like, I don't think I believe in alien, like a true alien abduction.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I would ever be a person who would be able to confidently be like, hello, yes, I have been abducted by aliens and I would like to talk about it. Uh, but then sometimes I think about like the other stuff that I do believe in, and I'm like, well, maybe with the right
Maybe.
circumstances. Uh, and both Antonio and Betty and Barney continued the rest of their lives to firmly believe that they
Mhm.
had been abducted. They gave obviously a lot of interviews. Like I said, movies and things were based on them. And whether or not it was psychological or media influence, following the report on the Hills experience, UFO abduction claims skyrocketed by 2,500%.
Hmm.
And this kicked off a long stint of kind of UFO slash alien mania that lasted well into the mid 80s and early 90s. Now, I would love to go into all that, but that's like a whole other chapter.
Yeah.
um, I
The I
would
mean,
love,
when you were like, "Alien abduction," I was like, "This is a big topic."
yeah, it is. And that's, I would love to at some point maybe like do this as kind of a two-parter and go into then like, because the 80s and 90s were its own very specific thing that
Mhm.
happened as
Yes.
well, where there was a skyrocket in alien abduction claims as well as just like media about aliens.
Mhm.
Um, so we can chat all about that some other time.
Yeah, this is the
Um,
1960s edition of
but
Alien.
this is the, yeah, the kind of the four frontier, the 40s through the early 70s of the great alien conspiracy. So if you are a person who is interested in I know that there are people who don't believe that aliens fall in the like spooky category.
Mhm.
But I hope this is enjoyable and interesting because I just find it fascinating what the human mind is capable of
Yeah,
making
I mean,
itself believe.
I think that any experience that you have had that leads you to be like, someone stuck stuff in me and I was in a spaceship and then I did this, I'm like, that's pretty spooky to me. So
Yeah, yeah. I also
whether
thought,
whether it was aliens or your own human mind, either is terrifying.
yeah, I also thought it was interesting that like the setup of the Hills abduction story was very similar to that one couple that saw Mothman.
Yes.
I
I
was like,
do
"We
feel
were."
like in the olden days, people were just like, "I was driving on a road, and then all sorts of crazy stuff happened." And I'm
Yeah.
like,
I'm
"Is
like,
this have we gotten rid of this now that we have, like, highways and good street lamps?" And
Right, right. Yeah, or yeah, just, like, was I'm wondering too, it's, like, so many times where people were like, "We were driving all night." I'm like, "Don't do that."
Yeah,
Like,
maybe don't.
maybe take a nap. But that is a little prehistory on alien
Ooh.
abduction. We did just have I meant to do this and I was not very smart. We did just have World UFO Day back in July.
Oh.
So there's some spooky UFO stuff for you. If you are enjoying learning about aliens and UFOs and all the other weird stuff that we talk about on this podcast, we would love for you to share that with us. You can leave us a rating or a review wherever you listen. And if you are not able to leave a review on your podcatcher of choice, you can always leave us a Spotify comment or shoot us an Instagram DM with that review. I believe Penny has a Spotify comment to share
I
today.
do. Yes, yes, you can leave comments on Spotify, and we do look at those. And this one comes from Felicia Happy Camper,
Nice.
who says, "This is one of my favorite podcasts. I listen immediately every time a new episode is released, and I'm in the middle of my second re listen. The ghouls
Aw.
touch on so many topics that I love. The subject matter is tame enough that I'm not afraid of my kids overhearing anything in passing. Thank you for all the great content." And then we've got an assortment of emojis. We've got a jack o' lantern, a skull, a butterfly, which I assume is a moth representation, ghost, bat, frog, gravestone, spider. Thank you, Felicia.
All the best
All
things.
the best emojis, all the things you need.
Well, yes, thank you so much for that review. It always makes me like have pause when people say that they are re-listening. I'm like,
I
"Really?
know.
Like, thank you, amazing."
Yeah,
But
I
you
know. That feels like such an honor.
I know. I'm like, "Wow, crazy." So thank you for choosing to spend, even more time with us. We really
Yeah.
appreciate it. If you would like to keep up with what's going on here at the podcast, you can follow us over on Instagram at Ghouls Night In Pod. And if you are looking for me, you can find me across the web at Midge Munster.
And you can find me at Penny Snark.
And until next time,
Uh,
goodbye.
bye.